The repair bay's familiar scent of synthetic lubricant and ozone filled Samantha Reed's nostrils as she examined the bio-suit before her. The translucent material shimmed under the workshop's harsh lights, its surface marked with an intricate network of neural pathways that shouldn't have been malfunctioning. Not on a diplomatic-grade suit. "You're sure about the timing of the malfunction?" she asked, glancing up at her client. Ambassador Vaeris stood tall and dignified, his iridescent scales catching the light as he nodded. Like all Ceresians, he required the bio-suit to survive in Earth-normal atmospheres. "It began exactly 3 standard days ago, during the interspecies trade negotiations," he replied, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into smooth English. The environmental controls started fluctuating. Minor issues at first, but growing worse. Samantha frowned, her dark eyes narrowing as she ran her diagnostic tool along the suit's spinal column. The readings made no sense. "This isn't normal wear and tear," she muttered, more to herself than to Vaeris. "The neural pathways are showing signs of reconfiguration." The ambassador's head frills flared slightly, a sign of concern in his species. Reconfiguration? That should be impossible. The suits are genetically locked to their users. Exactly. Samantha pulled up a holographic display, expanding it so Vaeris could see. "Look at these patterns. Someone's been modifying your suit's base programming. Subtly, but definitely deliberately." She watched as Vaeris studied the display, his multiple eyes focusing and refocusing on different sections of the data. She'd learned to read Ceresian body language during her years working in New Singapore's diplomatic quarter. The way his secondary breathing vents were pulsing suggested he was deeply troubled. "Miss Reed," he said finally, "I believe I require more than just repairs. I need your expertise in investigating this matter." Discreetly, of course. Samantha ran a hand through her short black hair, considering the implications. She'd built her reputation on being the best bio-suit mechanic in the sector, and more importantly, on keeping her clients' secrets. But this was different. This was politics. "Ambassador, I'm just a mechanic," she started, but Vaeris interrupted with a soft clicking sound, the equivalent of a gentle laugh. "You are far more than just anything, Miss Reed. Your understanding of bio-suit technology exceeds that of many Ceresian engineers. And you have something we lack, an outsider's perspective." Before she could respond, her diagnostic tool chimed. The results made her blood run cold. "Ambassador," she said slowly, "these modifications, they're not just monitoring your suit's functions. They're recording everything. Every conversation, every meeting, every biological response. And transmitting it somewhere." Vaeris went very still, a Ceresian's equivalent of pale shock. "The trade negotiations," he whispered. "The military cooperation agreements. The colonial expansion plans. All compromised," Samantha confirmed grimly. She straightened up, decision made. "I'll help you, Ambassador. But we need to be careful. Whoever did this has access to extremely sophisticated technology. And they're probably not just targeting you." "Agreed." Vaeris's head frills rippled with determination. "Where do we begin?" Samantha turned back to the bio-suit, her mind already racing through possibilities. "First, we make it look like I'm just doing standard repairs. Meanwhile, I'll try to trace these transmissions." "But Ambassador." She met his compound eyes seriously. "You'll need to keep wearing the suit. If they realize we're on to them." "I understand. We must maintain the deception." He paused, then added, "And Miss Reed? Please call me Vaeris. I believe formality will soon become irrelevant given what we face." As Samantha began the delicate work of appearing to make routine repairs while actually investigating the suit's modifications, she couldn't shake the feeling that she just stepped into something far bigger than herself. The familiar tools in her hands suddenly felt inadequate against the weight of whatever conspiracy they'd stumbled upon. What she couldn't know yet, was that the modified biosuit in her workshop was just the first thread in a web that would soon threaten the delicate peace between humans and Ceresians. And that her expertise with these complex pieces of technology would make her either the perfect person to prevent a war, or the perfect scapegoat to start one. 3 days into their investigation, Samantha's workshop had transformed into an impromptu command center. Holographic displays flickered across the walls, showing the complex web of transmissions she'd detected emanating from Vaeris's biosuit. The ambassador himself stood beside her workbench, watching as she soldered a microscopic sensor into place. "Another anomaly," she murmured, eyes fixed on the delicate work. The transmission patterns changed during diplomatic meetings. They become more focused, more intentional. Vaeris moved closer, his biosuit humming softly. Despite knowing it was compromised, he had to keep wearing it. They couldn't risk alerting whoever was behind the modifications. "Show me," he requested. Samantha set down her tools and pulled up the latest data. "See these spikes? They correspond exactly with your military cooperation meetings. Someone's very interested in our defense capabilities. Or our vulnerabilities," Vaeris added grimly. His head frills rippled with concern as he studied the patterns. "Samantha, I've been thinking. My suit can't be the only one affected." She nodded, having reached the same conclusion. "I've detected similar transmission signatures from other biosuits in the diplomatic quarter. But I can't get close enough to confirm without raising suspicion." She hesitated, then added, "There's something else. The modifications, they're elegant. Beautiful, even. This isn't the work of amateurs or common spies." Before Vaeris could respond, Samantha's security system pinged. Someone was approaching the workshop. They quickly shifted positions, making it appear as though they were conducting routine maintenance. The door slid open to reveal Naira Blackwood, the human colonial administrator's chief of staff. "Ambassador Vaeris," Naira said, her perfectly pressed uniform and severe expression a stark contrast to Samantha's practical work clothes. "I wasn't expecting to find you here. Again." "Ms. Blackwood," Vaeris greeted her smoothly. "Merely ensuring my equipment is functioning optimally. The atmospheric variances on your world can be challenging." Naira's sharp eyes surveyed the workshop, lingering on the holographic displays that Samantha hadn't quite managed to completely hide. "Of course. Though I would have thought the official diplomatic maintenance team would be more appropriate." "Ms. Reed's reputation speaks for itself," Vaeris replied. The subtle shift in his posture, barely noticeable unless you knew Ceresian body language, told Samantha he was suspicious of the unexpected visit. "Indeed." Naira's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, don't let me interrupt. Though, Ambassador, the governor would appreciate your presence at tomorrow's security briefing. We have some concerns about recent, technological irregularities in the colony's communication grid." After she left, Samantha and Vaeris exchanged looks. "That wasn't a coincidence," Samantha said quietly, running a scan for surveillance devices. "She knows something. The question is what," Vaeris agreed. "And whose side she's on." He moved to the workbench where his damaged biosuit components lay spread out. "These technological irregularities she mentioned could be related to the transmission network we've detected," Samantha finished. She pulled up a new holographic display, this one showing the colony's communication grid. "Look at this. The timing of the grid disruptions matches perfectly with the strongest biosuit transmissions." Vaeris's secondary breathing vents pulsed rapidly, a sign of excitement or anxiety. "They're using our own suits to piggyback signals across the colony's network." "But why?" "The diplomatic channels already give them access to most of this information." "Unless they're after something else," Samantha mused. She began cross-referencing the transmission patterns with colony events. These peaks, they don't just correspond with meetings. They align with ship movements, defense grid tests, atmospheric processor maintenance. Her eyes widened. They're mapping everything. Every vulnerability, every potential point of failure in the colony's infrastructure. An invasion plan? Vaeris suggested, but Samantha shook her head. No, this is too subtle. Too precise. She brought up the modified biosuit's neural interface patterns. They're not just gathering data. They're testing responses. Your suit's environmental controls didn't malfunction randomly, they were probing to see how you'd react. How the colony's systems would compensate. Testing for weaknesses, Vaeris realized. But not for an invasion. For something else. Samantha was about to respond when her systems detected another anomaly. The neural pathways in Vaeris's suit were changing again, adapting to some unseen signal. As she watched, the patterns began to shift, becoming more aggressive, more unstable. Vaeris, she said urgently, take off the suit. Now. The ambassador didn't hesitate, initiating the emergency release protocols. But as the suit began to disengage, every display in the workshop suddenly flared with blinding light. The last thing Samantha saw before the power failed was a new pattern emerging in the neural interface, not a transmission this time, but what looked like a countdown. In the darkness, Vaeris's bioluminescent markings cast a soft blue glow over the workshop. It would appear, he said quietly, that we've triggered something. Or someone triggered it for us, Samantha replied, her hands already moving to her backup systems. A warning, maybe. Or a declaration, Vaeris finished. They both knew the stakes had just gotten much higher. Whatever conspiracy they'd stumbled upon, it was no longer content to operate in the shadows. The question was, were they ready for what would happen when it stepped into the light? Darkness enveloped the workshop as Samantha worked feverishly to restore power. The only illumination came from Vaeris's bioluminescent markings and the faint emergency lights. The ambassador's partially removed biosuit lay inert on the workbench, its neural pathways dark for the first time since they discovered the modifications. Secondary systems online in 3, 2, 1, Samantha muttered. The workshop hummed back to life, displays flickering with reduced power. She immediately began scanning for threats, her fingers flying over the holographic controls. The countdown sequence, Vaeris said, moving to examine his biosuit. It wasn't meant to harm us. It was copying data. Samantha nodded grimly. And transmitting it somewhere. But this time. A smile crept across her face. This time I was ready. I managed to trace the signal. The holographic display showed a three-dimensional map of New Singapore's underground infrastructure. A pulsing red dot marked the signal's destination, deep in the old maintenance tunnels beneath the Colonial Administrative District. That's impossible, Vaeris breathed. Those tunnels are supposed to be sealed. After the atmospheric processor accident last year. Exactly. Samantha pulled up the official colony records. The perfect cover. Nobody goes down there because it's officially too dangerous. But look at these power readings. Something's active down there. Something big. Before they could discuss it further, Samantha's secure communication channel activated. The face that appeared in the hologram belonged to Marcus Wong, her old friend from the Colonial Engineering Corps. His usually cheerful expression was replaced by worry. Sam, we've got problems, he said without preamble. 3 more biosuits just went into cascade failure. 2 Ceresian trade delegates and a Proximan ambassador. The diplomatic quarter is in chaos. Samantha's blood ran cold. Casualties? No, thank God. But Sam. Marcus lowered his voice. The suits didn't just fail. They were recording everything. Private meetings, secure communications, biological data. And get this, they all received the same signal your workshop just picked up. Vaeris's head frills flared with alarm. They're accelerating their timeline. But why now? The answer came from an unexpected source. Naira Blackwood's face appeared on every display in the workshop, overriding their security protocols. But the woman's usual cold composure was gone, replaced by genuine fear. "Reed, I know you're tracing the signals," she said quickly. "I don't have much time. Everything you've discovered, it's worse than you think. The biosuits, the data collection, it's not about invasion or espionage. They're trying to prove incompatibility." "Incompatibility?" Samantha repeated, but understanding was already dawning on Vaeris's face. "Between species," he said quietly. "They're building a case that humans and non-humans can't coexist. That even our basic life support technology is failing." Naira nodded. "The atmospheric processor accident last year wasn't an accident. It was a test run. Now they're moving to the next phase. You need to get to the tunnels. Find the evidence." Before the transmission cut off abruptly. Samantha was already moving, grabbing her emergency kit and tech tools. "We need to go. Now." "The security briefing tomorrow," Vaeris said, helping her gather equipment. "That's their timeline. They're going to use it to present their evidence. Start a panic. And with your biosuit compromised, you can't come with me," Samantha realized. The atmosphere in the tunnels would be lethal to a Ceresian without protection. "No," Vaeris agreed, then reached into a hidden compartment in his ceremonial robes. He withdrew a small, crystalline device. "But I can give you this. It's a Ceresian emergency beacon. If you activate it, my government will have no choice but to investigate, officially." Samantha took the device, understanding its significance. Using it would force both human and Ceresian authorities to acknowledge whatever she found. No cover-ups, no diplomatic sweeping under the rug. "The tunnels will be guarded," she said, checking her equipment one last time. "I'll create a distraction in the diplomatic quarter," Vaeris replied. "Draw attention away from the administrative district." "And Samantha?" He hesitated, then reached out to touch her hand. The gesture, coming from a usually reserved Ceresian, spoke volumes. "Be careful. Whoever these people are, they've been planning this for a long time." As Samantha slipped into the maintenance access shaft that would lead her to the tunnels, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into more than just a conspiracy. This was about to become a turning point in human-alien relations. And somehow, she, a mechanic who just wanted to fix things, had ended up at the center of it all. The darkness of the tunnel swallowed her, but her determination remained unshaken. Someone had tried to use her skills, her repairs, as part of their plot to drive a wedge between species. Now she would use those same skills to expose their lies. And maybe, just maybe, help build a bridge instead of a barrier. The maintenance tunnels beneath New Singapore's administrative district were a maze of shadows and echoes. Samantha's footsteps, despite her careful movement, seemed to bounce off every surface. Her portable scanner showed she was getting closer to the source of the transmissions, but something wasn't right. The power readings were fluctuating wildly. Her comm unit crackled. "I've initiated the distraction," Vaeris's voice came through, accompanied by the sound of chaos in the background. "Called an emergency session of the Trade Council. Claimed to have evidence of systematic tech theft. That should keep them busy." "Good thinking," Samantha whispered, pausing at an intersection. "How much time will that buy me?" "An hour, maybe less. They'll figure out it's a diversion eventually." A pause. "Samantha, these readings I'm getting from your scanner, the power signatures matched Ceresian quantum processors." "Impossible," she breathed, but the data on her display confirmed it. "That's restricted technology. Even the diplomatic corps doesn't have access to, she stopped abruptly. Voices echoed from somewhere ahead. Pressing herself against the wall, Samantha activated her scanner's audio enhancement. The voices became clearer, and her eyes widened as she recognized one of them, Governor Richard Palmer himself. The evidence is irrefutable, Palmer was saying. The biosuit's neural interfaces are breaking down at the cellular level. Cross-species adaptation is failing. When we present this data tomorrow, the Ceresian government will have no choice but to admit the compatibility problems, another voice finished, one Samantha recognized as Director Preston from the Colonial Science Division. They'll have to withdraw their people. For their own safety, of course. Samantha's hands tightened on her scanner. She'd worked with Preston before, trusted him. Now she was hearing him calmly discuss forcing an entire species off-world. And the Proximans? Palmer asked. Their ambassador's biosuit failure was most convincing. They'll follow the Ceresians' lead, Preston assured him. No species wants to risk their diplomats' lives on failing technology. The human colonies will remain human. As they should be. Samantha had heard enough. She needed to find the proof, the real data that would expose their manipulations. Following her scanner's readings, she moved deeper into the tunnel complex, eventually reaching a heavy security door. The lock was high-tech, but she hadn't spent years repairing biosuits without learning a few tricks about Ceresian technology. Inside, she found what looked like a complete research facility. Rows of servers hummed, their displays showing familiar neural interface patterns. But these weren't just recordings, they were templates. The original code that had been uploaded to the diplomatic biosuits. I'm in, she whispered into her calm Varys, they didn't just modify the suits. They created a program to make them fail. Make it look like natural degradation of the neural interfaces. Can you prove it? Better. Samantha's fingers flew over the nearest console. I can reverse it. The code, it's brilliant, but it's still based on standard Ceresian protocols. If I can isolate the malicious elements. A slow clap interrupted her. Samantha spun to find Naira Blackwood stepping out of the shadows, but not the frightened woman from the earlier transmission. This Naira moved with cold confidence, flanked by security officers. Impressive, Naira said. We wondered if anyone would be clever enough to trace it back here. Though I must admit, we expected a Ceresian engineer, not a human mechanic. Why? Samantha demanded, her hand inching toward the emergency beacon in her pocket. Why try to force them off-world? Progress requires sacrifice, Naira replied. Humanity needs room to grow, to develop without the restrictions of interspecies cooperation. Every great civilization in history achieved greatness through independence, not collaboration. That's not progress, Samantha shot back. That's fear dressed up as pride. Call it what you want. Naira nodded to her guards. But you won't be attending tomorrow's security briefing to share your theories. The guards moved forward, but Samantha was already moving. She slammed her hand down on the console, initiating the data transfer she'd prepared. At the same time, she pulled out the Ceresian beacon and activated it. The effect was immediate. Alarms blared throughout the facility as every system registered the presence of an official Ceresian emergency signal. Naira's face contorted with rage. Do you have any idea what you've just done? She snarled. The diplomatic implications are exactly what we need, Samantha finished. Above them, the sound of multiple transport vehicles could be heard landing. You wanted everything official? Congratulations. Now both governments will have to investigate. No cover-ups. No quiet diplomacy. The facility's doors burst open, admitting both colonial security and Ceresian diplomatic security forces. Among them stood Varys, wearing a new, uncompromised biosuit, his expression both concerned and triumphant. As Naira and her conspirators were taken into custody, Samantha connected her scanner to the facility's main computer. "I've isolated the degradation program," she told the assembled officials. "And more importantly, I can prove it was artificial." The biosuits weren't failing. They were being sabotaged. The security briefing, one of the colonial officers said. They were going to use it to present false evidence of cross-species incompatibility, Vaeris finished. Create a diplomatic crisis that would force non-human withdrawal from human colonies. Samantha met Naira's eyes as the other woman was led away. "You forgot something important," she said quietly. "Real progress isn't about what makes us different. It's about how we overcome those differences together." The next few hours were a blur of official statements, evidence collection, and diplomatic communications. But through it all, one thing became clear: the conspiracy had failed. Instead of driving a wedge between species, they had inadvertently created an opportunity for even stronger cooperation. 2 weeks after the underground facility raid, Samantha stood at her workshop window, watching the sunset paint New Singapore's skyline in shades of gold and purple. The colonial capital had changed in subtle but significant ways since the conspiracy's exposure. Mixed-species security teams now patrolled the streets, and the sight of humans and aliens working together had become even more common than before. Her workshop had changed too. New equipment lined the walls, official gifts from both the colonial administration and the Saresian government. Her reputation as a biosuit mechanic had evolved into something more. She was now the leading expert on cross-species technical integration. The door chimed, and Samantha smiled as Vaeris entered. The ambassador moved with his usual grace, his new biosuit gleaming. She'd personally overseen its construction, incorporating improvements based on what they'd learned from the conspiracy's modifications. "The Joint Committee has finished their preliminary report," he announced, placing a data crystal on her workbench. "They're implementing your recommendations for biosuit security protocols across all colonial territories." "Good." Samantha picked up the crystal, turning it in her hands. "And the conspirators?" "Governor Palmer and Director Preston have been removed from their positions. Naira and her core group are facing charges from both governments." Vaeris's head frills rippled with satisfaction. "More importantly, their actions have had the opposite effect of what they intended. The Saresian High Council has fast-tracked several joint development projects with human colonies." Samantha nodded, remembering the conversations she'd had with various officials over the past 2 weeks. They realized we're stronger together than apart. That our differences can be advantages instead of obstacles. Indeed. Vaeris moved closer, his biosuit humming in perfect harmony with the workshop systems. "Which brings me to another matter. The High Council was particularly interested in your insights into biosuit technology. They've proposed creating a new position, Chief Technical Advisor for Interspecies Integration." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a title." "It would mean dividing your time between here and Ceres Prime," Vaeris continued. "Working directly with both human and Saresian engineers to develop new technologies. The Council believes having someone who understands both species' perspectives is essential." "And what do you believe?" Samantha asked softly, noticing the subtle shifts in his bioluminescent patterns that she'd learned to read so well. "I believe," Vaeris said carefully, "that understanding between our species goes beyond mere technology. The conspirators were right about one thing: adaptation is crucial. But they failed to see that true adaptation comes from choice, from willing collaboration and—" He hesitated, his patterns flickering in a way she'd never seen before, "from connection." Samantha's heart quickened as she understood what he wasn't quite saying. "There's no precedent for this kind of connection between our species. There was no precedent for a human understanding Saresian technology as you do. No precedent for what we uncovered together." His hand moved toward hers, stopping just short of touching. Perhaps it is time to create new precedents. The moment was interrupted by an urgent alert on her systems. Another biosuit malfunction was reported in the diplomatic quarter, but this time, it wasn't sabotage. Just a routine repair need. Duty calls, Samantha said with a small smile, already gathering her tools. Allow me to assist, Vaeris offered. I find I've developed quite an interest in the technical aspects of cross-species integration. As they worked together, their movements synchronized from weeks of practice, Samantha reflected on how much had changed. She'd started out as just a mechanic, someone who fixed broken things. Now she was helping to build something entirely new, not just in technology, but in understanding between species. Later that evening, as they stood on her workshop's balcony watching the stars emerge, Samantha made her decision. I'll accept the position, she said. But I have one condition. Oh? Vaeris's patterns shifted with curiosity. I want to establish a joint human-Ceresian technical academy here in New Singapore. A place where both species can learn from each other, develop new technologies together. She turned to face him. And I want you to help me run it. His patterns blazed with joy, a display of emotion rare for a Ceresian. Creating new precedents already? Someone has to. She reached out, her fingers intertwining with his. The biosuit's neural interface hummed, adapting to the contact, creating a connection that bridged their biological differences. Besides, I've learned that the most interesting discoveries happen when we stop trying to fix our differences and start exploring them instead. Above them, ships from a dozen species moved through the darkening sky, their lights mixing with the stars. In her workshop behind them, new designs for the next generation of biosuits waited to be developed, suits that would do more than just allow species to survive in each other's environments. They would help them truly understand each other. The conspiracy had tried to prove that different species couldn't coexist. Instead, they'd helped prove that they couldn't progress without each other. And in her own small way, in her workshop with her tools and her understanding of both human and alien technology, Samantha would help build that future. One repair, one improvement, one connection at a time. To new precedents, Vaeris said softly, his biosuit glowing with patterns that matched the stars above. To new beginnings, Samantha replied, knowing that what they were building, in technology, in understanding, and in their relationship, was just the start of something much bigger than themselves.